because I even have a pointer. It has a laser on it as well. So, but today, what I want to talk about is my research into gender in the horror film. And I assume that you're all comfortable with the fact that I'm going to show some fairly graphic images in the fact that I'm talking about horror film. But I just want to put that out here, that some of the pictures I have to show are a little graphic. Nothing too bad. No dismembered corpses or anything like that. I tried to stay PG-13, but I am going to be talking about horror film. My interest in gender in horror film really started with my interest in gender in literature. I started out by looking at gender in Shakespeare plays, and somehow from there moved into horror film. But my interest in gender in horror film started with an interest in postmodern gender theory, which attempts to divorce gender from the body. Okay? So we tend to look at a man, a biological male, and assume that he is going to have what we might call masculine characteristics, right? That he's going to be aggressive, that he's going to be ambitious, that he's going to be strong and assertive. And we look at a biological female and assume that she might be more nurturing or softer, kinder, those kinds of things, because we take gender and we script it onto the biological body. Postmodern gender theory attempts to divorce this, and it says gender is not a biological construction. There's nothing about being born with a vagina that is going to make you be nurturing. And there's nothing about being born with a penis that's going to make you aggressive or assertive. Those are cultural roles that are scripted onto us. When we think about that in terms of horror film then, it's really interesting because horror films are all about the body. They're about bodies being cut up, mutilated, and killed. And they're also about bodies that mutate into monsters. And a lot of what I want to talk about today is the monster. Okay? I'm going to talk about vampires, which is why the title of my presentation is When Queer Bites Back. And so we're going to be looking at some popular films, including the Twilight Saga, at some point today. I've got some graphics I want to show you. I've got a YouTube video that I want to show. But I want to start out by talking about the cultural context of talking about gender divorce from the body. This is a protest sign that was recently carried by opponents of legalizing gay marriage, or opponents of what we might call marriage equality, out of protest in Washington, D.C. in late April of 2009. And if we look at the way that this is scripted, we see that we're really focusing on biology, right? Marriage is a man plus a woman. I wanted to read a quote from Margaret Somerville's The Case Against Same-Sex Marriage. Okay? This is an actual legal document that was presented in Canada to argue against same-sex marriage being legalized there. And Margaret Somerville says, by institutionalizing the relationship that has the inherent capacity to transmit life, that between a man and a woman, marriage symbolizes and engenders respect for the transmission of human life. To change the definition of marriage to include same-sex couples would destroy its capacity to function in the ways outlined above, because it could no longer represent the inherently procreative relationship of opposite-sex pair bonding. So in other words, Margaret Somerville is making an argument that marriage exists to further people having children, right? So by that logic, even if you were a man and a woman and you got married, the point of that should be to have kids. Okay, we could go all over that. That's not the point of my talk today. The point of my talk today is to show that as a society, right now, the conversations that we're having about gender come back to the body, which makes horror film, as an embodied kind of experience, a really interesting place to be able to look at gender and what's happening with postmodern gender theory. I'm using this term queer, which, how many of you, when you hear that, get a little not sure that's a good word. Not sure we ought to call people queer. And it has been used in negative ways. I don't mean it in any kind of pejorative or derogatory way. Queer is a particular theoretical positioning of queer theory. What queerness does is to challenge what we call the heteronormative order. The heteronormative order being that what's normal is for a man and a woman to desire one another, heterosexuality to be normal. And furthermore, for gender roles to be normal for a woman to act feminine and a man to act masculine. So when I say heteronormativity, that's what I mean. Queer, however, is going to challenge this heteronormative order, and queerness is not just homosexuality. Okay? Queerness is an inclusive term that is going to include lesbian and gay, as well as pansexual, bisexual, transvestites, and these are terms that the queer community actually uses for themselves: drag queen, leather daddy, pansy, fairy, dyke, butch, femme, asexual, and intersex. Okay, so queerness is an encompassing term. So today I'm talking about more than just homosexuality when we look at gender roles and we look at what is going on in the horror film. So I don't know, has anybody here seen the remake of the Nightmare on Elm Street, the 2010 version? Show of hands? Yeah. Pretty good movie, right? Although Johnny Depp, right? How do you not have Johnny Depp and Freddy Krueger? This is really interesting, and I think gets us into why horror film is such an interesting place to look at gender. The quote that I pulled out here from Freddy Krueger is, "I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy." Right? And we look at Nancy, young, beautiful girl who is in her bathtub, naked, and there's a man's hand coming towards her with claws. Nancy's getting ready to be penetrated by the claws, right? And penetration has a particular connotation in our culture, right? Nancy's screwed at this point, essentially. Okay? I'm glad you guys decided to laugh along with me. We need some nervous Twitters whenever we first start this out. So let me set the scene by talking about Nightmare on Elm Street, just for a minute, okay? I'm going to read you a few paragraphs of the introduction to this manuscript that was referred to. The book is actually called Embodying Gender in the Horror Film. I just want to read you a few paragraphs to kind of lay the theoretical scene. I promise that that's all the long kind of reading I'm going to do to you today, and then I'll just talk about some of my different slides and ideas. So if you would, for me, just close your eyes and imagine the scene that I'm getting ready to lay for you. The camera follows a teenage boy in an orange jumpsuit as he paces nervously down a stark white prison hallway. Suddenly, he encounters a solid wall. He hesitates, turns back toward the camera with an expression of dawning horror. The hallway melts into the dark corridors of an abandoned warehouse, lit only by the distant glow of red-orange flames. Sounds echo. Footsteps on rusted walkways, the hiss of metal on metal as a knife slides along the wall, throwing sparks. Sweat beads the boy's forehead. He jumps at every noise, straining to see into the shadows. The camera pans from his frightened face to two mangled corpses hanging upside down, suspended from the ceiling. "Chris," the boy moans, recognizing his girlfriend's twisted features. Cruel laughter fills the air. The boy trembles, realizing he has fallen into Freddy's nightmare world. You can open your eyes. Okay? This scene from Samuel Byers' 2010 remake of the 1984 teen slasher flick in Nightmare on Elm Street reminds us that the embodiment of horror in film takes many forms. The mutilated corpse that's hanging from the ceiling, the sweaty brow of the panicked victim, which used to be Johnny Depp, the scarred features of the monster killer, right? Freddy Krueger is a horrifically deformed monster, and the pounding of our own hearts as we sit in that darkened theater and wait to see if Jesse is going to escape from Freddie. Horror film, then, is an embodied experience. The focus is totally on the body, both for the characters on the screen, whose bodies are quite literally the subject of the film, and for the audience, who responds as I did by shrieking, or jumping, or hiding our eyes. My husband is used to me hiding. I say, tell me when I can look. Clenching our fists, right? Our hearts pound, our stomachs tense up. When we consider the gendered work of horror film, then, we're inevitably led to consider the relationship between gender and the body. And this relationship is a complex one. For though contemporary gender theory maintains that gender is not biologically constructed, that it's socially constructed, biological sex remains the most visible site of gender construction. When you look at me, you can tell that I'm a woman, I assume, right? I look womanly. And none of you arch an eyebrow about the fact that I came in here today to speak to you wearing a skirt. Perfectly normal, right? Would any of you have raised an eyebrow if I would have come in here to talk to you today in a pair of pants? No, it would have been perfectly normal. What if Dr. Miriam came in here to talk to you today and he was wearing a skirt? Weird. Weird, yeah, queer, right? I mean, what a queer thing to do, Garrett. Why would you do that? That is because the body is still the most visible site of gender construction. When you look at me and you see that I'm a woman, you assume that I'm going to act in a feminine way. I have chosen to tackle gender's relationship to the body because it is a still contested site for gender research. And I do so through horror film because it deals explicitly with the body as it works out problems of postmodern gender identity. So let me give you just one little bit of theory that I'm going to work from today. Gender multiplicity, the theory of gender multiplicity, draws from the work of Guy Deleuze and Felix Guattari, and it advocates understanding gender identity as multiplicitous. Instead of being confined to a male-female binary, gender identity is, first of all, not restricted to a choice between masculine and feminine. There are more ways to be than just a really aggressive masculinity or a really passive femininity. That's what Deleuze and Guattari tell us, that we're not restricted to a choice between masculine or feminine. There's many kinds of gender identities. Furthermore, our gender identity is not determined by our biological sex. Okay? It's a social construction. And I think this point is one of the most interesting. Gender identity is only one of many components comprising a larger self-identity, which is itself always becoming. So the experience of being a woman, if you are black and upper class and highly educated, is different than the experience of being a woman if you are white and impoverished and not highly educated. So that gender identity is not the only thing that determines who you are, and our gender is always becoming. It's always being scripted. We're always deciding how to be a man or how to be a woman at different points in our life. And so what we see happening then is that we are making gender fluid.